What kind of dying man becomes the god of an entire world? Lin Imo had 3 months left, yet a wooden sandbox was about to answer him. At 24, Lin Imo should have been chasing a career, love, and a better home for his parents. Instead, he walked out of First City Hospital with a report that felt heavier than a coffin lid. The doctor called it synovial sarcoma stage 4, already scattered through his lungs and liver. 3 months, that was the sentence spoken calmly by a man in a white coat. Lin did not remember the road home, only the heat on his face and the laughter outside his gate. The old courtyard looked the same, but to him, every wall seemed suddenly far away. He sat on a plastic stool, coughing so hard his ribs felt ready to crack. Anger rose before fear did, and he crushed the medical report in one shaking hand. The paper flew across the yard and landed on a dusty wooden box left by the previous tenant. It was just a sandbox forgotten in the corner, dull enough to be ignored forever. Lin almost kicked it, then stopped because even his anger had nowhere useful to go. When he opened the lid, he found plain yellow sand, dry and motionless under the sun. Then he thought of his parents, and the tears he had held back finally slipped free. One tear fell into the sand, followed by a drop of blood from his violent cough. The box began to hum. The grains stirred like something beneath them had opened its eyes. A miniature desert rose from the sand with dunes, rocks, and valleys shaped in perfect detail. White words floated in the air telling him the dimensional sand table had awakened. It named him as the bound user, and it called his life Energy Zero. Lin reached towards the words, but his fingers passed straight through them like mist. This was not a hallucination from panic. The impossible was sitting in his courtyard, quietly waiting for his next thought. And in the middle of terror, one wild hope stabbed through his chest. Maybe this thing could save him. He touched a dune, and knowledge poured into his mind like water through a broken dam. He could reshape the tiny land by thinking. A hill sank into a valley when he willed it, though the effort left him dizzy. For one breath, a dying man stood above a world like its creator. But when he tried to make water from nothing, the sand table rejected him. So Lin ran inside, grabbed a glass, and let a single drop fall into the valley. To that tiny world, the drop became a clear lake shining inside the desert. The panel changed, asking whether he wanted to inject the concept of life. His throat tightened. The decision should have frightened him, but death was already at his door. Lin accepted. The blood on the sand glowed red, spreading through the lake like a living sunrise. A piece of something deeper than strength pulled out of him, as if his soul had paid the price. The panel called the cost primal blood. The first single-celled organisms entered the lake of beginnings. At first, Lin saw nothing but clear water, and disappointment nearly swallowed him. Then he remembered the sand table responded to thought. He focused closer, deeper, smaller. The lake expanded before his mind until the invisible became a glowing underwater universe. Tiny specks of life split, drifted, and multiplied beneath his gaze. Lin had made life. He was still sick, still broke, still alone, but he was no longer only a patient. He was the creator of a world smaller than a wooden box. Yet the panel still showed life energy at zero. The creatures were too simple to help him. Evolution needed time, and time was the one thing his body did not have. Lin found the speed setting and pushed it to the maximum. That was his first mistake as a god. A wave of exhaustion slammed into him as if he had not slept for several days. He nearly collapsed beside the stool, gasping like the cancer had returned to punish his greed. The lesson was cruel and clear. If he abused the world might survive while he died beside it. After resting, he watched the cells race through generations inside the lake. They divided, consumed, and vanished, turning seconds into ages. The sun dropped, and Lin realized he had neither eaten nor drunk since the diagnosis. For the first time that day, survival felt like a task instead of a fantasy. He cooked noodles with eggs, but kept glancing toward the courtyard. When he returned, the number had changed. Life energy had risen by the smallest possible trace. It was barely more than nothing. But it was not zero. His theory was alive. When the panel asked whether he wanted to absorb it, Lin did not hesitate. A warm current entered his arm and spread through his chest like rain soaking cracked earth. The stabbing pain in his lungs softened. It did not vanish, but it weakened enough to make his hands tremble. Lin whispered that he could live. Then the pot boiled over in the kitchen, dragging him back from miracle to smoke. He forced himself not to celebrate. A tiny trace of energy could not cure a body riddled with cancer. He needed more life, more complexity, and more evolution. Night fell over the old courtyard. Lin sat beneath the moon, watching the sand table glow without needing a lamp. The life energy climbed again, still slow but steady enough to keep hope awake. Single cells were not enough. The lake was peaceful, and peaceful worlds rarely leap forward. Life needed pressure. Life needed change. Lin remembered the word photosynthesis from school and cursed himself for not paying better attention. The lake had water, but it lacked light. He dragged a desk lamp outside and aimed its white glare over the sand. This time the sand table accepted the concept. Green algae bloomed in the shallows and bubbles rose like tiny pearls. Oxygen had entered his world. The life energy began climbing faster. Lin absorbed the growing warmth and the pain in his lungs almost faded beneath the repair. For a few precious minutes, he felt like someone had washed sickness out of his bones. The algae spread until the lake looked painted in green. Primitive creatures stirred more actively in the oxygen-rich water. A small ecosystem had begun to breathe. But the lake was still just one lake. If life stayed trapped in water, his hope would stay trapped with it. Lin tried to push moss toward the damp sand, but the panel refused. The algae had not evolved far enough. He could not skip every step. Even gods had to wait for foundations. Near midnight, exhaustion finally beat excitement. Lin absorbed the gathered energy, felt his body lighten, and slept peacefully for the first time since the report. While he slept, the sand table kept racing. For tiny creatures, one human night became an era. When morning touched his face, Lin woke without the usual heaviness in his skull. He ran into the courtyard and froze. Around the lake, a soft green carpet had spread over the wet sand. Moss had reached land on its own. The first land species clung there, shining under the morning sun. Lin understood what had happened. The algae had grown crowded, competition had sharpened, and the wet shore had become their escape. Survival of the fittest had done what command alone could not. The life energy had jumped dramatically overnight. When Lin absorbed it, warmth surged deeper than before. For the first time, he could sense cancer cells inside him dissolving like stains under sunlight. It was slow, far too slow, but it was not comfort anymore. It was healing. The dead desert around the lake suddenly looked like unused farmland. Moss could not conquer dry land by itself. Lin needed ferns, rivers, and a wider world. He carved winding channels through the sand, with his mind digging basins and riverbeds. The strain stabbed his brain like needles. Being a creator was not majestic from up close. It was exhausting labor done by a sick man on a stool. After resting, he poured water into the high source of the river system. To the miniature world that cup became rushing streams, branching lakes, and fresh wetlands. The panel praised the increase in water coverage and evolution potential. Lin turned to the moss and injected the concept of ferns. This time the world accepted it. As tiny leaves unfurled near the banks, Lin's phone rang. The hospital wanted him back for a free, full examination. Director Wang had found something unusual in his records. Lin knew exactly what that might be. His body had already begun to change. He agreed to return the next morning, then turned back to the sand table with sharper focus. The first ferns rose above the moss, catching light with stronger bodies. Life energy improved, but plants alone could not make a complete cycle. A world of producers would eventually choke on itself. Lin needed consumers, decomposers, and danger. The lakes were already full of protozoa and simple animals feeding on algae. He chose the path of arthropods, imagining small bodies, harder shells, and better digestion. The concept entered the world. Tiny, shrimp-like creatures and water bugs burst into existence, devouring algae and moss. The life energy shot upward. For a moment, Lin smiled like he had found a field of golden crops. Then the smile died. The new creatures had no enemies. They multiplied until black dots filled every river and lake. They ate green patches bare, stripping the ecosystem faster than plants could recover. A red warning flashed. The balance was collapsing. Lin had created his first disaster. If the plants vanished, the herbivores would starve. The lakes would die, and he would lose his only chance. He considered wiping them out, then rejected the thought. Destroying them would only cut away another source of energy. Better to guide than to erase. Predators were the answer. Fish were too advanced for this stage, but the arthropods themselves could split into hunters. Lin pushed sharper jaws, faster limbs, and predatory instinct into selected creatures. The cost almost dropped him to the ground. In the lake, some arthropods changed into blade-mouthed hunters. They shot through the water, cracked shells, and dragged their own kin into the food chain. The peaceful lake became a battlefield. Lin watched without pity because nature had finally found its teeth. The panel confirmed a new structure: producers, primary consumers, and secondary consumers. Life energy surged beyond anything before. A harsh world produced more life than a fragile paradise. The predators stabilized prey, adapted plants recovered, and an arms race began. Some herbivores grew harder shells. Some hid in sand. Some moved faster than the jaws chasing them. The world was becoming smarter through pain. Then Lin saw certain hunters rushing onto damp shores during chases. They could not stay long, but the movement caught his full attention. Animals were trying to land. Lin helped them breathe air and strengthen their limbs. Generation after generation, the chosen arthropods lasted longer on shore. The first true land animals were born, feeding on moss rot and fallen plant matter. Life energy finally broke past a whole number. This time Lin remembered balance before disaster arrived. He turned some water predators into land hunters like tiny scorpion spiders stalking the soil. The land ecosystem matured quickly under claws and fear. By the next morning, Lin had stayed awake through the whole night without feeling tired. His body was no longer acting like a terminal patient. In the sand table, arthropods ruled every corner. Among them, one fingernail-sized species stood apart. They behaved like ants with workers, soldiers, queens, tunnels, and stored food. Then Lin saw them move a heavy fern spore by building a tiny slope of sand grains. They had used tools. The first spark of intelligence had appeared. Lin decided not to interfere too much. Intelligence needed space, not a clumsy god crushing its future with constant orders. He left for the hospital, but his mind kept drifting back to the chosen ants. At first, City Hospital Director Wong stared at him as if the report had walked in wearing a new face. Lin looked healthy, clear-eyed, and steady on his feet. Nothing about him resembled a man with 3 months to live. The doctor ordered test after test. Lin stayed calm through the morning, letting machines search for an explanation they would never find. While waiting for results, he closed his eyes in a quiet corner. His awareness returned to the courtyard sand table, and shock struck him again. The ant colony had expanded more than tenfold. At the center of the nest stood orderly fields of fungi. They had discovered farming. Workers carried rotting leaves as fertilizer. Gardener ants managed moisture and temperature around fungal beds. This was no longer instinct. This was stored knowledge, shared behavior, and the first shape of civilization. The panel named it a primary intelligent civilization, the kingdom of ants in the early agricultural era. Life energy no longer crawled. It raced upward like a river after rain. Lin resisted absorbing it inside the hospital. The miracle would wait until he was home and hidden. That afternoon, Director Wong explained the new results with a careful smile. The previous diagnosis had been inaccurate, he said. The tumor was still there, but not at the final stage. With treatment, Lin had a strong chance. Lin acted relieved and grateful. But outside the office, his expression changed into a quiet, knowing smile. A misdiagnosis was perfect. It explained everything without explaining anything. At dusk, he returned home and went straight to the sandbox. The ant kingdom had grown again. New roles had appeared. Workers, soldiers, gardeners, and strange priest ants. The priests gathered around a translucent stone holding a dried drop of dark red substance. Lin recognized it immediately. It was his original blood. The ants were worshipping the source of their world. Their faith amused him, but it also united them. The life energy had climbed far beyond anything before. Lin absorbed it. A flood of warmth exploded from the table and poured into every cell of his body. Bones, muscles, lungs, and blood seemed to be rebuilt from within. When the current stopped, strength filled him like thunder held under skin. He tested himself on a heavy water jar in the courtyard. With one hand, he lifted it over his head like a foam box. Life energy did not only heal, it strengthened. Lin returned to the sand table with a dangerous new excitement. The ant civilization was useful but still limited. Its bodies were too crude for real progress. Before that, he gave them one more gift: fire. He struck a match and let it fall into dry ferns near the colony. To the ants, it was a burning star sent from heaven. Panic swept the nest, but the priest ants approached with trembling awe. One bold priest touched an unlit twig to the flame. The twig caught and the keeper of fire was born. As time accelerated, the ants learned warmth defense and cooking. Roasted prey changed their diet and pushed their civilization forward. Yet Lin still frowned. Ant mouths could not shape fine tools. Their limbs lacked precision. Their exoskeletons limited brain growth. Their pheromone language could not carry complex thought. If nothing changed, they would become only clever insects. Lin chose the firekeeper. He imagined internal bones hands with fingers, larger brains, vocal cords, and a face like his own. The sand table demanded mental energy and life force. Lin checked the panel and accepted the cost. The chosen ant's shell melted. A white skeleton formed inside, limbs stretched and hands opened where legs had been. After a long transformation inside accelerated time, a tiny naked man stood in the sand table. He had black hair, black eyes, and a confused but thinking gaze. A female worker who had guarded him touched a glowing fragment of his broken shell. She transformed more gently and became the first woman. Their mouths produced rough sounds, then attempts at imitation. Speech had begun. The panel named them Adam and Eve. Human civilization had been born. The other ants withdrew in fear, but Adam and Eve had fire thought in each other. Lin created a fertile oasis around the largest lake. Green meadows, trees, fish, birds, and fruits surrounded the place he shaped for them. This became their Eden. Adam and Eve settled there after being rejected by the ant colony. Without desperate hunger, they explored named things and improved their language. They made spears, baskets, cooked fish leaf coverings, and a simple wooden house. Soon children filled Eden with noise. Human life spread faster than Lin expected. Then Lin decided a civilization needed reverence. At the center of Eden, he marked the blood-red crystal as forbidden. Every fruit was allowed, but the crystal could not be touched or disrespected. Adam, Eve, and their children knelt in terror beneath the unseen will of God. The rule was planted. But among the children, one boy looked at the sky differently. His name was Cain. Others looked upward with awe. Cain looked upward with curiosity, hunger, and hidden defiance. He was stronger and smarter than his siblings. He improved spears, twisted plant fibers into fishing nets, and earned admiration. But his attention kept returning to the forbidden crystal. Why would God protect a stone unless it hid power? On a moonlit night, Cain entered the forbidden zone alone. He stood before the crystal and pressed his spear tip into its red heart. Far above, Lin dropped his drink in the courtyard. A filthy, chaotic energy poured back through the sand table. Cain's curiosity had pierced the origin blood of the world. Pure life essence mixed with greed, conquest, selfishness, and ambition. Cain rose with eyes colder than before. He declared himself a god and walked out of Eden. Lin tried to erase him with divine power, but a twisted force from the pierced blood protected Cain from total destruction. Instead, Lin cursed and banished him, changing his name in the flow of fate. Cain became Lucifer. Cast into the wild, Lucifer did not break. He conquered. He reached the ant kingdom, tore soldier ants apart with his bare hands, and forced the queen to submit. The old insect civilization became his first empire. Under his rule, ants turned into a brutal war machine. Workers labored, soldiers marched, and rebels vanished under punishment. Lucifer unified tribes, enslaved survivors, and built a bone and obsidian city. He called himself king. He ordered the construction of a giant tower meant to challenge heaven itself. Lin watched with a cold expression. Lucifer was dangerous, but danger made the world evolve with frightening speed. Dark energy appeared beside life energy on the panel. The Sandbox had produced its first enemy of God. Meanwhile, humans outside Eden suffered after their banishment. They survived in caves and forests, telling stories of lost paradise and the stolen fire. Many began to resent the God who had expelled them. One young man did not. Michael prayed every day, believing humanity suffered because it had broken divine law. His faith was stubborn, painful, and pure. Lin noticed him. A loyal believer who hated Lucifer was exactly the counterweight the world needed. That night, Lin sent Michael a dream. A blinding figure named Lucifer as a thief and Michael as the chosen messenger. When Michael woke, wings of holy light burst from his back. He became the first angel. The new holy light energy appeared on Lin's panel. Michael healed a sick child and gathered frightened humans around him. He promised redemption to those who resisted the demon king. His rebel band was tiny, barely a spark against Lucifer's empire. But sparks mattered. Lin guided Michael to the places where oppressed humans and rebellious ant-men still endured. The first alliance formed in a border mine. Humans and ant-men once separate dug trenches, raised fences, and prepared traps together. Lucifer answered by sending the Black Armor Legion under Azazel. 5,000 black-armored soldiers moved like a living tide. Their shells deflected arrows. Their axes shattered the first defenses. The alliance nearly collapsed under the first charge. Then Michael descended in holy light. His presence strengthened allies and weakened the black-armored troops. Azazel leaped at him like a cannonball, forcing a battle across ground and sky. Michael could not match the general's brute strength, so he dodged, cut blessed, and kept the army alive through movement and light. For the first time, Lucifer's war machine stopped advancing. At the Tower of Babel, Lucifer received the news without fear. He decided to come himself. When his pressure reached the battlefield, every creature froze. Lucifer appeared like a walking disaster, carrying the dark authority born from stolen divine blood. Michael confronted him, demanding freedom for the enslaved. Lucifer laughed at words like freedom and dignity. To him, strength was the only law, and he was the highest proof of that law. He raised one hand and formed a black sphere that devoured light. The sphere expanded over the Allied army. When it faded, hundreds of soldiers and the ground beneath them had vanished. Only a smooth crater remained. Michael's followers lost courage at once. Against Lucifer, war no longer looked like war. It looked like erasure. Lin watched from outside the sand table and realized his angel was losing too quickly. Lucifer's stolen power was deeper than a simple blessing. Michael fought anyway. He was beaten into the ground, wings cracked, sword, broken golden blood dripping from his mouth. For a moment, even Lin thought the rebellion had failed. Then Michael's soul refused the ending. He rejected his limits, his borrowed strength, and the fate of being only a pawn. Something inside him broke open. The angel concept evolved by force. His shattered wings burned into eternal golden flames. He rose as a higher being of judgment. Lucifer finally stopped smiling. The two powers met above the battlefield, dark conquest against burning guardianship. Michael's new light cut through Lucifer's shadows. Lucifer gathered a disaster star of darkness to erase the world under them. Michael answered with his final sword, a calm, golden judgment carrying his life and soul. Light and darkness collided. There was no simple explosion. They annihilated each other into a black and white singularity that twisted sky, earth, matter, and time. Both beings were drained by the collision. Michael burned into golden sparks. Lucifer's dark body tore apart around the stolen divine blood. Their final struggle shattered the world they had tried to rule or save. Below them, Noah watched the battlefield turn into a nightmare. He was only a craftsman and healer, not a warrior. He saw humans, ant-men, plants, and earth crushed by powers too large for the world. In his heart, a simple truth grew clear. Violence could not save life. When Michael and Lucifer finally vanished, they left behind more than victory and defeat. They left a damaged world. Heavenly light and demonic darkness had ripped the rules apart. The ecosystem trembled on the edge of collapse. Lin looked at the sand table and felt the heavy cost of creation. His first world, the one born from a Terran blood, was infected by a war too intense to repair. He made a decision that hurt more than he expected. The world needed cleansing. Lin filled a basin with water from the faucet. In the sandbox, Noah received the last clear divine command of that era. The world would be drowned. Only he, his family, and chosen creatures could survive in an ark. Noah did not argue. He gathered the survivors and built on the highest mountain with desperate speed. 7 days in the sand table passed like a breath outside it. When the ark was sealed, Lin poured the basin into the sandbox. To the little world, the sky split open. Floods fell from above, while the earth cracked and released dark waters from below. Cities, towers, graves, battlefields, and palaces disappeared beneath roaring waves. Lucifer's empire sank. Michael's battlefield sank. Even Eden's memory disappeared beneath the flood. Inside the ark, Noah held his people together through darkness and shaking wood. Lin watched silently, feeling less like a proud god and more like someone burying his own mistakes. When the waters finally calmed, the world was a single, endless ocean. Noah released a white bird. For many days, no land answered. Then the bird returned with a green branch in its beak. Land had risen again. The ark reached a mountain slope, and Noah stepped onto wet earth with tears of relief. A new era began from mud seeds and memory. This time, humans had to share the world with giant beasts Lin had allowed to remain. The beasts were terrifying, thick-skinned, and strong enough to destroy careless villages. Noah guided people to survive with wisdom instead of arrogance. They built traps, improved spears, used poison, and learned to fight terrain instead of muscle. Villages grew. Fields of grain appeared. Children were born inside wooden homes. Noah taught them respect for God, respect for nature, and the history of the drowned world. Under his influence, the new civilization chose work, learning, and restraint over conquest. As generations passed, Noah became an old prophet with white hair. His village became a city-state. Humans tamed animals, shaped pottery, smelted bronze, traded goods, and explored the continent. After death, another change appeared. Souls began to divide according to the marks of their lives. Those filled with faith and kindness rose toward a bright realm shaped by Michael's remaining imprint. Those full of cruelty sank toward a dark realm shaped by Lucifer's remaining imprint. Heaven and hell were born from the echoes of the two fallen suns. Angels guided some souls. Demons tempted the weak and dragged others downward. Lin saw holy light energy and dark energy rise alongside life energy. The cycle was perfect. Living civilization produced life energy. The dead fed the realms of light and darkness. Michael and Lucifer were still useful even as ghosts of opposing laws. Lin called them his good sons with a smile. The Bronze Age moved forward quickly. Trade roads formed between cities. Temples kept people cautious. Most wars remained small because heaven and hell reminded humans that choices followed them after death. But time wears down fear. As wealth grew, lords became greedy again. Old teachings became words recited without being felt. In White Sail City, guards beat a foreign trader bloody over a petty dispute. A young descendant of Noah named Yellen stepped forward. He paid the fine, treated the wounded man, and climbed a market step. There he reminded the crowd that they were all children of the Ark. The people laughed at first. Some mocked him for clinging to dusty scriptures, but Yellen did not shout them down. He went from city to city, tribe to tribe, choosing patience over force. In the Wild Stone tribe, guards threatened to kill him. Yellen answered that killing him would not feed their hungry children. Instead of preaching first, he helped them clear fields, heal the sick, and make better tools. Only after trust formed did he speak of Noah and the Creator. He taught tribes to trade instead of raid. He showed enemies that salt grain skins, herbs, and tools could bind them better than bloodshed. Over years, Yellen became a living bridge between city-states. His faith was not a weapon. It was a road. Lin watched him with real satisfaction. Human civilization had finally learned that peace could also drive development. Life energy rose steadily. Holy light and darkness also grew through every moral struggle. Lin absorbed the energy many times until his body changed beyond ordinary limits. He ran faster, lifted more, reacted quicker, and no longer feared the disease that once ruled him. One day he tested himself and realized his reaction speed had passed normal human boundaries. Yet excitement faded into emptiness. His body had reached saturation. More life energy made him stronger only by a little, like water poured into an already full cup. He looked inward and found the last cluster of cancer cells still hiding inside him. They no longer spread wildly. After repeated washes of life energy, they had mutated into a strange symbiotic state. Lin could erase them if he wished, but he chose to keep them as a reminder. Those cells were the scar that proved where his path began. Still, he wanted more than a superhuman body. He wanted wings like Michael Darkness, like Lucifer, real extraordinary power in the outside world. The Sandbox answered coldly. He lacked permission. Holy light and dark authority belonged to rules inside the Sandbox world. Lin was outside it, the binder, the creator, and the energy source, but not a user of those internal laws. The power came from him, yet he could not wield it directly. For a moment he laughed bitterly. Was he only a backstage administrator in a human-shaped power bank? Then he asked a better question. Could knowledge cross the boundary? The Sandbox finally gave him hope. If intelligent life inside the world created an extraordinary system through research and understanding, that system would exist as knowledge. And knowledge could be learned. Lin's eyes sharpened. He did not need to hand them power. He needed them to discover power themselves. If humans built magic cultivation or any new law through wisdom, he could study it from outside. His gaze moved to the center of the continent. There, the ruined foundation of Lucifer's unfinished Tower of Babel still waited under wind and dust. The old tower had been ambition. Now Lin could turn it into bait. In White Sail City, the elderly high priest Yellen prayed before a statue of Noah. His hair had gone white and his body carried the cost of a life spent walking for peace. He worried that when he died, the city-states might return to ambition and war. Then the Creator's will descended into his mind. Yellen collapsed with tears, believing the long silence since Noah had ended. Lin showed him a vision of a giant tower piercing the clouds. Not a tower of slaves and bones, a tower of knowledge. Inside, the vision craftsmen, farmers, warriors, and scholars climbed level by level through learning. Some studied stars, some studied matter, some studied life. Some argued, tested, failed, and tried again. Lin declared that faith was only the beginning, not the end. True devotion meant exploring the rules the Creator had placed in the world. The ruins of Babel would be rebuilt. Each level would represent knowledge and discipline. Anyone who reached the top through wisdom and will could glimpse the threshold of the divine realm. Yellen understood the message with trembling joy. God had not lowered a throne. God had lowered a ladder. The next morning he gathered priests and city lords across the continent. He announced the revelation of the Tower of Knowledge. The continent exploded with excitement. Craftsmen wanted better tools. Scholars wanted hidden laws. Warriors wanted power beyond bronze and muscle. Even doubters could not ignore the promise of touching the divine realm. Under Yellen's call, the best builders, thinkers, and guards set out for the center of the continent. Lin watched outside the Sandbox with a quiet smile. The bait had been cast. He would not build the tower for them. That would ruin everything. What he wanted was the process. To rebuild Babel, humans would need mathematics, architecture, physics, engineering, medicine, and courage. Every obstacle would force their minds upward. Every failure would become a step. And when they finally discovered a power that belonged to knowledge instead of authority, Lin would learn it too. The dying man from the old courtyard was gone. In his place sat a creator who had learned the cruelest rule of all. A world grows fastest when its people choose to climb. And Lin Imo was ready to watch them build the first stairway toward the divine. He did not imagine the tower as a temple for blind worship. He imagined it as a furnace where ignorance would be burned away. The first difficulty would be simple distance. The continent's center lay far from the comfortable cities near rivers and coasts. Roads would have to be planned instead of guessed. Food would have to be stored without spoiling. Water routes would have to be measured before caravans dared to cross them. Even before one stone was raised, organization would become necessary. Lin liked that. A miracle handed down from heaven could feed faith for a day. A difficult project could feed progress for generations. Yellen understood part of that truth even if he dressed it in holy words. He sent messengers to every city-state with tablets carrying the divine command. He asked lords for workers, merchants for supplies, priests for scribes, and warriors for protection. Some leaders answered out of faith. Some answered because they feared losing honor. Some answered because no ruler wanted another city to touch the divine first. Lin did not care which reason moved them. Desire, fear, pride, reverence, curiosity, and ambition all turned the same wheel. As long as the wheel turned forward, knowledge would grow. A large expedition gathered under Yellen's call. Bronze tools glittered beside baskets, ropes rolled maps, and carefully guarded provisions. Old scholars argued over measurements before the journey even began. Young craftsmen carried polished hammers like sacred relics. Soldiers checked spearheads and shields, not knowing what waited on the road. Farmers brought seed grain, dried meat, and the steady hands needed for survival. Yellen stood at the front, old but bright-eyed, holding Noah's teachings close to his heart. To the crowd, he looked like a saint guiding the world toward heaven. To Lin, he looked like the perfect spark placed beside dry tinder. The march set out toward the continent's center. Dust rose under many feet. From above, the procession looked like a thin, dark thread crossing a vast board. Lin leaned closer to the sand table, unwilling to miss the direction it would take. Every wagon wheel that might break could teach better carpentry. Every bridge that might fail could teach load and balance. Every dispute over distance could refine numbers. Every sickness in the camp could push healers to study bodies instead of only prayers. That was why Lin could not interfere. A god's hand could solve one problem instantly, but human hands solving that same problem could create 100 pieces of knowledge. Lin had learned that lesson from the Sandbox itself. When he rushed evolution, he almost destroyed ecosystems. When he gave too much, creatures became dependent or monstrous. When he created Lucifer, he learned that stolen power without restraint breeds tyranny. When he created Michael, he learned that righteous power could still tear the sky apart. When he spared Noah, he learned that humble wisdom could rebuild what miracles had ruined. Now he wanted a different path. Not power bestowed from above. Not darkness stolen from forbidden blood. Not holy light granted through dreams. He wanted knowledge born from effort. That was the only power that might cross into his own world. The ruins of Babel were no longer only a scar in his eyes. They were bait. They were a question waiting at the center of the continent. They were also a test for the civilization Noah had saved. Could humans look at the place Lucifer used for ambition and turn it into study? Could they build without slaves? Could they climb without trying to steal God's throne? Those questions mattered more than the tower's height. Lin watched the expedition move, but he kept his hands away. He would not clear the road for them. He would not lift the stones. He would not whisper every answer into Yellen's dreams. If beasts blocked them, humans would have to plan. If rivers stopped them, humans would have to design crossings. If quarrels divided them, leaders would have to create rules. If the old ruins frightened them, faith would have to become courage. Every obstacle was useful. To rebuild Babel, they would need mathematics. They would need architecture. They would need physics before they even had the word for it. They would need records stronger than memory. They would need medicine, logistics, surveying, metallurgy, and patience. This was no longer simple survival. It was civilization being forced to think about itself. Lin looked at the energy panel and imagined the numbers rising in a cleaner way. Not violently like war, not explosively like the birth of humans, but steadily, deeply through questions repeated by thousands of minds. For the first time, he felt he was not merely farming life. He was cultivating possibility. The old version of him might have absorbed every spark immediately. The desperate patient would have grabbed life energy like a drowning man grabs air. But this Lin could wait. He wanted to see what kind of flame knowledge would make. He understood now that civilization was not a tool with one handle. Push it with fear and it builds armies. Push it with faith and it builds temples. Push it with hunger and it builds farms. Push it with questions and it may build a road beyond the ordinary. The Tower of Knowledge would become that question made of stone. Yellen believed he was leading people toward the Creator's approval. The craftsmen believed they were chasing impossible techniques. The scholars believed the divine realm hid laws that could be understood. The warriors believed strength beyond bronze might wait at the top. All of them pointed toward the same mountain. Lin smiled because this time he did not need everyone to be pure. He only needed them to climb. He knew faith could inspire them. He knew ambition could tempt them. He knew competition between city-states could sharpen them. He knew even doubt could be useful because doubters asked better questions. The Sandbox had taught him that balance was never soft. Predators saved the lakes from collapse. Lucifer's darkness created an enemy that forced Michael to rise. The flood ended one corrupted era so Noah could begin another. Now the pressure would be intellectual. The challenge would not be surviving claws or conquering cities. The challenge would be understanding. Lin looked at the quiet courtyard around him. The same walls still stood. The same old stool sat nearby. The dusty box was still small enough to be carried by 2 hands. Yet inside it, an entire civilization was preparing to climb toward the unknown. That contrast made him breathe slowly. A few days earlier, he had been a dying young man with no future. Now he was waiting for mortals in a sandbox to invent the key to extraordinary power. The irony almost made him laugh. But beneath the humor was something heavier. He could heal himself. He could strengthen himself. He could guide civilizations. But if he wanted to evolve further, he needed them as much as they needed him. The Creator had become dependent on his creations. It excited him. A world that could teach its God was a world worth protecting. So Lin let the expedition continue. He let Yellen carry the revelation. He let scholars argue. He let craftsmen dream. He let warriors wonder what waited beyond ordinary strength. He let the ruins of Babel call them from the horizon. He let the promise of the divine pull them forward. No thunder pushed them. No invisible hand carried them. Only desire, faith, fear, curiosity, and the hard road beneath their feet drove them on. That was enough. The bait had been cast. Outside the sandbox, Lin rested his hands on the wooden edge and watched the tiny procession move. He was no longer begging the sand table for a cure. He was waiting for a civilization to teach its creator how to evolve. The old courtyard stayed quiet around him. But inside the wooden sandbox, maps widened, voices argued, and the first journey toward the Tower of Knowledge began. Stone by stone, someday Babel would stop being a relic of rebellion. It would become a promise hammered into the center of the continent. Beyond that promise, Lin sensed the outline of power he could one day learn. For the first time, the Creator was also becoming a student. Lin Imo watched the first stairway toward the divine take shape in human will, and this time he let humanity build it.